Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw!
And that is an AP clip of Elon Musk from back in February at the CPAC conference, the Conservative Political Action Conference, when he, as the de facto head of the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE,
Just like the coin,
metaphorically took a chainsaw to what he referred to as bureaucracy.
Soon after Elon Musk's appearance at CPAC, some government agencies, nonprofits, and private enterprises that interact with the federal government began receiving notices of cancellation of federal funding. Some of those cuts were immediate, some more of a sort of Damocles, a looming threat of cuts to come.
Many of these notices used language indicating that said organization's work falls outside the administration's priorities. And many of these cuts, or threats of cuts, have local implications.
Over the last several weeks and months, we have spoken to or heard from local entities here in the 413 who have felt the impact of these cuts or fear the impact that future cuts may hold.
And today on the show, we're going to talk with some more folks who are experiencing the chainsaw that the current administration has wielded on federal spending. Let's start with Sally Loomis, who was featured in the Gazette the other day, talking about the cuts that your organization, Hilltown Land Trust, will be experiencing through the AmeriCorps program. Sally, explain to us what, first of all, Hilltown Land Trust is, and then we'll talk a little bit about the cuts.
Sure. Hilltown Land Trust is a regional land trust or community land trust. We serve 13 small towns west of the Connecticut River, all really little towns. I tell people there's no stoplights in our service area. And we do land conservation projects. We take care of land that's conserved, and we do a lot of work to engage volunteers and community members in caring for land.
Tell us about how you received, first of all, what federal funding you were receiving.
Yeah, so we don't receive federal funding. The federal funding cuts were to the TerraCorps program, which is an organization that Hilltown Land Trusts and many, if not most, land trusts in Massachusetts work with. And TerraCorps receives federal funding through AmeriCorps and the Massachusetts Service Alliance. And so TerraCorps received word at the end of April that the federal AmeriCorps agency had abruptly terminated funding, including funding for TerraCorps. And this means that we have a service member who's essentially a staff person, though that's not what we call them. And that person's funding was terminated, meaning that without external support, we wouldn't be able to support that person. That person's service term was set to go through the end of July.
And this is like before it was announced that AmeriCorps was basically being dissolved.
Well, the AmeriCorps program has taken many blows, and so this was sort of one of the middle blows, I would say. We weren't shocked by this, but the timing of it couldn't have been more stark. Our TerraCorps service member had just finished opening a trail that she'd been working on for the past year and a half with just hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours and volunteers, and literally got home from that wonderful event that would not have ever happened without her help, and looked at her email and found out that the program had been cut. So just very dramatic.
Yeah.
That is Sally Loomis from the Hilltown Trust, Hilltown Land Trust, where the TerraCorps funding through AmeriCorps has been. Is it suspended? Is it gone for good? Is it immediately gone, Sally? How did it work? Because it's worked differently with different organizations.
Yeah, that's a great question.
The proposed PBS and NPR cuts, because we're under this sort of Damocles as well to a certain extent. How did it manifest itself?
Yeah, so they abruptly terminated the program and cut off funding as of April 25th. Not surprisingly, Massachusetts joined into a lawsuit with several other states contesting the cuts. And so we're now sort of in this waiting period to see what happens with that. So the TerraCorps program, which is a nonprofit organization, has tapped into their non-federal funding to help us in for a month, continue the service members as they had been, but they're doing this without the federal support. The hope is that the lawsuits will bring the program back, but it is not looking that hopeful.
Yeah. And in an email we got earlier in the year from Sean Pollock at TerraCorps that they got a notice from AmeriCorps for all 43 members that are part of the Massachusetts and Rhode Island TerraCorps to basically stay home and not participate in the program anymore. And that was at the end of April.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what your TerraCorps position does with the Hilltown Land Trust, some of the other actual tangible things that this federal spending has impact on in the Hilltowns in the area where we live.
So a few things. One is that, at an organization our size, we have 5 staff members plus a TerraCorps member. We really rely on our TerraCorps member, whose title is Land Stewardship Coordinator, to do a lot of the vital functions of the organization. So as an accredited land trust, we need to visit each of the 50 properties we have conserved once a year. And that TerraCorps member coordinates all those site visits. And they involve a lot of volunteers as well, but these things don't organize themselves. They take a lot of work. So she coordinates that really required aspect of our work. In addition, it's our TerraCorps member that really connects volunteers to the work of the organization. So whether we're building trails, maintaining trails, getting people involved in citizen science programs, that needs a person organizing things. And that's what our TerraCorps member really does for us. So as our organization transitioned from being an all-volunteer organization to a staffed organization, we tapped into this AmeriCorps program and have for the past 12 years. And that program has really enabled our organization's volunteer roots to continue. There's absolutely essential work that we do that they coordinate. And then there's also a lot of things that just really connect people more to our work and, educate folks and get them involved.
That's Sally Loomis from the Hilltown Land Trust, who is going to potentially be losing their TerraCorps member as part of the work that they do there at Hilltown. You mentioned that TerraCorps, Sally, is floating your person through TerraCorps for the next month. What are the anticipated plans after that next month? Are there plans afoot already?
Yeah. So, fortunately, our organization can help ensure that our service member continues through the end of what was intended to be her service term, which is 2 months, and it's through the end of July. And that makes us tapping into unrestricted resources that we'd really intended for other purposes, but we have made that commitment, so we're not leaving her out in the street. The bigger panic for our organization, and I imagine many others, is what do we do in ensuring that this absolutely vital work to our organization can be done into the future? Because if we don't have this AmeriCorps program to tap into, we need to look at a cost that's 3 or 4 times what it would have been without the TerraCorps program or without the AmeriCorps support. And that's a big lift for a little organization.
Yeah. And not just in labor, but in what you're able to, you're a land trust, it reduces how much you're able to maintain or look at possibly conserving in the future. It's more widespread than you would initially imagine.
Yeah. What are some of the properties that people might have heard of that Hilltown Land Trust is working with, where, this impact could potentially be felt in some of the places that they love to go and experience here in Western Mass?
Sure. We have several trails that people might be familiar with. There's a bunch in Williamsburg, the Bradley and Breckenridge properties. We opened 2 new trails, thanks in large part to our TerraCorps member this past year. One's called Hilltown Boulders, and it is in both Ashfield and Goshen. And then another is called Clary Hill. That is also in Goshen.
It's named after Clary Higgins, who joins us in the studio as well.
Wouldn't that be if it was in Northampton?
Oh, maybe.
And then
Sandy got a beach named after him. Come on.
We also have a lovely property in Worthington called the Conwell property, which gets into a really interesting wetland area where we've got some just amazing footage from wildlife cameras of all the wildlife in there.
If you're unable to do more with your conservation work, do you foresee some of the industrial development on these properties or in that space the same way that we are potentially looking at on a larger federal and state scale with some of the parks as well?
You know what? One of the things that this position does at Hilltown Land Trust is monitors our conserved land to make sure there isn't encroachment that shouldn't be there. So, having that done by somebody who's well trained and has all the tools at their disposal, and then can pull in volunteers to be sort of consistent is really important. So I think that is an area where I'm nervous about encroachment, is that, lands that are already conserved, they have a legal agreement stating what can and cannot be done on the land, are just a bit vulnerable if we don't have the consistency in monitoring them. Ultimately, losing 1/6 of our staff team does mean that we can't do as much in the conservation realm, and we have way more people lined up to do conservation projects with us than we can serve already. So this is just one more hit to that.
And like so many of the organizations we've spoken to previously, that with USDA grants and other NEA grants, NEH grants, these were things that were agreed upon, signed, sealed and delivered, and or passed through the legislature, right? Can you tell us where exactly this money from TerraCore came from? Is it a grant that is at the disposal of the executive branch, or is this something that had been passed through Congress that you were counting on for at least through the duration of the time that you'd agreed to?
I'll do my best here. So I said no hard questions. This is what I can tell you is that this was a fiscal year 2024 grant. So TerraCore gets its grants in 3-year cycles, and we were in the middle of that. So, it should not be cut. And I do believe it's passed through Congress, but, that's getting into the weeds of what I thankfully don't have to deal with too much.
Talk about what you're doing to overcome the cuts and what we can do as a community to help support you through it. Let's start with the person we started with, Sally Loomis, the executive director of the Hilltown Land Trust, who lost a TerraCore through AmeriCorps grant.
Yeah, thanks. So most of our organization's funding comes from individuals, from our community. So now more than ever, we need that community support. But it's also likely that we need to slim down a bit what we are doing in the short term, because the community can't cover everything that the federal government was supporting. Unfortunately for us, that's a challenge, because it means we would need to lean more into our volunteers, and we are losing the position that coordinated our volunteers. So I think the solution is a combination of the community rallying with support and volunteer efforts, and paring back a bit of what we were doing.